Hi everyone, welcome. This is Artist Loft 101, Intro to Graphite Pencils and Drawing Forms. I'm Adrienne Hodge, your instructor, and I'm happy to be with you guys on Wednesday evenings and some other dates going forward. So I hope you'll tune in for more classes. These classes are going to be structured like a very long drawing class. We're starting out with the basics and we'll be building on the skills that we're starting with class number 1 tonight. And moving forward, we'll have more advanced classes, more intermediate classes. Where's everybody coming from tonight? Let me know where you are. I'm in Austin, Texas. Got somebody from California. It's a national class, so I'm excited to see people from all over. Ontario, Quebec, Wisconsin. Wow. Someone hi from Austin. Kansas. Long Beach. Hi, Monica. How are you? Anna from Florida. Nice to see you. Tracy from Maryland. Well, welcome. I'll repeat it at the end. If anybody is interested in following me on Instagram, my Instagram handle is Adrienne Hodge Art. I'm gonna put it in the chat there. Oh, Lisa says she's interested. That's my mom. Hi, Mom. And I just put my handle in wrong. It's at Adrienne Hodge Art. I am a teaching artist, living and working in Austin, Texas, like I said, and I do a lot of classes on my own and here in Austin, most everything on Zoom these days, and I'm excited to be hosting these classes for Michael's. Any art that you make with us tonight, be sure to post it wherever you post your art on social media with the hashtag Make It With Michael's or hashtag Michael's Classes. Oh, Riley says you do animations on YouTube. Nice. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started if everyone's ready. Did anyone have any questions about the supply list that was posted for the class? Any questions? It was a pretty small supply list tonight. All I asked folks to get were the Artist Loft sketching pencils, 12. There's 12 of them in this set that that was suggested, and synthetic eraser and sketching paper. The paper size is not important, no. So we're just going to be doing some really basic standard stuff today. So we're not going to get too far. We might have a product that looks like that by the end. So we're going to be talking about the graphite pencils themselves for a bit here. So if this was your first time buying a set of graphite pencils, you probably noticed that they have all of these numbers and letters on them. And that's fine if you don't have the art pencils tonight to start. If you want to just follow along and grab them later, you can still do the exercise that we're doing tonight even without the HB pencils, but it definitely helps, and you're going to see why once I get rolling. But yeah, you can just come back to it later. Definitely just follow along with whatever pencil you have handy, mechanical pencil. We are going to definitely talk about a number 2 pencil, so if you got one of those, that's totally fine. Okay, so when you look at these pencils in the set, they have numbers and letters on them, right? They've got H's and B's. So the H on the H pencil stands for hard, and the B on the B pencil stands for black. But it's the softer of the 2 pencils. So you can think of them as hard and soft. And so I made this little diagram here of the art pencil spectrum. And right in the middle, we've got an HB. So if you look on the side of a number 2 pencil, you'll see that it says HB on it. So a number 2 pencil is an HB pencil. It's right in the middle. And so what's happening with the pencils, I was just going to find my HB there. So number 2 pencil will often say HB over on the end. What's happening is on the H pencils, the harder pencils, they've got less graphite in them and more binders that are added to the pencil, like wax or whatever is added to the pencil to create the pencil. Obviously, the wood casing is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just the writing element itself. So on the H pencils, it's going to have more of those binders in it and less graphite. So you're going to end up with a harder pencil. And the B pencils have more graphite, and graphite itself is pretty soft, right? If you get a graphite stick, it's going to be really messy in your hands. And even the graphite sticks will say 2B, 4B, 6B on them, etc. Right? So it basically just means it has more graphite, less binders, so it's going to be a softer pencil. The way I like to remember it is that the B stands for butter because it's soft. So as those numbers get higher on the B side, your pencil is going to be getting softer, it's going to be getting darker and more like butter. So the B is softer. As the numbers go higher, it's getting softer, it's getting darker. And then as those numbers get higher on the H side, the pencil is going to be getting harder and lighter. So a lot of people have no clue when they first start drawing and they get these pencils and they just sort of pick one and just start drawing with it. And I'm willing to bet a lot of you are the same. So tell me, which one is your go-to? Which one do you pick up typically and draw with out of those? The softer ones, maybe? What are some reasons why, and 2B, I was waiting for somebody to say the 2B or the HB. Yeah, people tend to gravitate towards the 2B or the HB because, or you just grab one, or the 4B, the softer ones. The softer ones are usually easier to manage, and people tend to stay away from the harder ones. And that is because it's so hard that we often end up with lines that are carved into the paper or engraved into the paper that are really hard to erase, right? How many of you, just like show of hands, has that ever happened to you? Yeah, everybody has experienced that. So the reason that's happening is because, so if you've got your H pencils there, I want you to grab your 5H, your hardest one, or if you've got, you know, just even a 2H or an H. If you only have B's, grab a B, just play along. But if you have an H, I want you to take the H pencil and we're gonna just sign our names with it in a minute. But first I wanna mention how when we were kids and we were first learning how to write with a pencil, we're limited in our dexterity as children for how we can hold a pencil. I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and when my daughter, who's the 8-year-old, was 5, I tried to get her to do what I'm going to get you to do in a minute, and she got really upset with me because it was very frustrating for her and hard for her to even hold the pencil any differently than the way that we learn to write in kindergarten or preschool, and that is to hold it really close to the end of the pencil, to grip it really tight, to get it, you know, to be able to control the movement that we're using with the pencil. So I want everybody to take their hardest pencil, their hardest H, and we're gonna do what we did in grade school. We're just gonna write our names and we're gonna hold the pencil nice and tight, grip it, make sure that, you know, you're really bearing down. You might even break your lead there. We're just gonna exaggerate what we're doing wrong, typically. Okay, so I'm just gonna carve my name into the paper here. All right, so what's gonna happen when I try to erase that, folks? What's happening when you try to erase your name when you draw it like that or write it like that? It's not going away, for one. If it is going away, I've got these ghost lines or these indentions in the paper that are going to be really hard to erase. And even if you're doing this with a B pencil, it's still going to be tricky. I saw somebody asking what the F pencils are used for. So an F pencil is sort of closer to an HB or an H or a B. It's in the middle of the spectrum. It stands for fine, so it's just got a little bit more of a fine point to it. I like to joke, just be like, it's fine. Literally, it's just fine. Okay, so if you can't erase it, you're still going to see these lines. And then if you go to shade on top of that with one of your softer pencils, like if I take a 4B, let's say I've got some sketchy lines that I erased and I was able to erase them, but then I go back and I sketch over that, then I've got these ghost lines showing through, right? They're still going to be visible. So somebody's asking, are 8Bs very dark? Yes, your 8B is going to be your darkest. So even darker than a 6B. Okay, so if that is happening when we use an H pencil, it's very easy to see why people just avoid the H pencils, because they can be so frustrating, right? Because that's happening. Somebody's asking, what's the lightest? It's the whatever the highest number is on the H side in your H pencil set. So if you've got, you know, a 5H, that's going to be lighter than a 2H or a 4H. So the higher the number goes, the harder and the lighter the graphite pencil is becoming. Somebody took issue with my spectrum once in a class and said it was confusing because it's like it's going down, but it's a spectrum showing more hard or more soft. So anyway, don't question my diagram, people. This is a very scientific system I've developed here. Okay, so what's the opposite of everything we just did when we signed our names with the H pencils? I told you to grip it really close to the end of the pencil, to have it pointing straight up and down like this. Thank you, Riley, likes my diagram. Okay, so what's the opposite, folks? If we're not holding it close to the end, we're not gripping it tightly, and we're not pointing it straight up and down, what would be the opposite? You can show me or put it in the chat. All right, so loose and light, loose at the end, hold it in the middle, slanted, very good. Hold it at the far end, at the back of the pencil. Okay, so if you've never held your pencil towards the back of the pencil, it can be really tricky to train your hand to do that, just to get the muscle memory. So holding it more in the middle might be easier, but if you can try to hold it towards the back, that would be the best. Somebody just asked a question that I wanted to answer, but I kind of missed it. Oh, is there a B higher than 8? 8 is the darkest, is the highest pencil I've seen. I've never seen a 10B. Somebody should make one. Okay, so we're going to hold it towards the back. At the very back would be nice, or in the middle if that feels weird. We're going to hold it parallel to the paper instead of perpendicular to the paper. So parallel to the paper or slanted, and we're going to go very light, very loose pressure here. So everyone sign your name like that with your really hard H pencil. Oh, I am using the 5H. I'm using the hardest, lightest one. Okay, so what happens when we erase that? It goes completely away. It's just a baby's breath sitting on the surface of the paper, and we can make it completely disappear. Is the HB the same as the H? No, the HB is going to have sort of a balanced mix, like an H and a B. Sort of split down the middle, half and half. Okay, so what do y'all think about drawing like that, holding it differently? What do you think about holding it that way? Anybody? So you hold it back of the pencil, you're holding it, it's awkward, right? Yeah, it feels awkward. And it was hard to do. Okay, but here's anything that's tricky is gonna be, take some practice. So if you've ever played an instrument, you know that there's a certain way, especially, like a trombone, you have to hold it a certain way, right, to make the music happen. So it's as if we've all been using a trombone for utilitarian purpose our entire lives, and now we're trying to make music with it. So it is a task. Anything, rewarding is going to take some practice. So it's hard to see my hand placement. I can do it more like this. Okay, so I'm holding it towards the back of the pencil and parallel to the paper, and notice where the movement is coming from. It's not coming from my wrist, it's coming from my arm. So you want to try to get the movement to happen in your bicep. That's what I was going to say next. So think about a mouse on your laptop, how if you're using the mouse with just your fingers, you don't have the same range of movement as you would if you were using a wireless mouse. So it's the same thing with your art pencils. If you watch any, follow any artists on YouTube or Instagram who post, process videos of them painting and drawing, start to notice how they're holding their paintbrushes and the pencils, and you're going to start to note that they are holding it towards the back, that they're holding it at an angle that's parallel to the paper, and that the movement is coming from their arm. So I know that it's tricky and it's awkward, and yeah, somebody was saying with the guitar, you got to get used to it and know the chords. Exactly. And I'm learning how to play the guitar right now. I almost use that analogy, but I've just been saying the trombone for some reason for years. So that's my go-to. But yeah, same with the guitar. It's, trying to get my fingers to stretch to be able to reach the different chords and the strings is really tricky, and it's a muscle memory that I've got to practice. So just like with drawing, it's a muscle memory and it takes some practice. But here are the rewards. Okay, so let's try to draw. So we're not using charcoal pencils this class, but next in a few classes down the line, we're going to introduce some charcoal pencils. So charcoal pencils are different from graphite. It's much darker, softer, and blacker. So you can, use those to get your really darkest darks if you're not achieving it with a 6B with graphite, but it's gonna, you're introducing a different medium. So there's a little bit more to talk about there, but we'll get to that in future classes. But what I wanted to, say next was the rewards of holding our pencil like this at this angle. So go to another page in my sketchbook here, and let's try to sketch some circles and then some spheres. So first of all, who's ever drawn a perfect circle the first time they tried? Raise your hand if you're drawing perfect circles all the time. Never. Okay, yeah, it's pretty hard to do. So let's see if I can do it with my H pencil. Even holding it. Well, here, yeah, let me try to do it holding like this. Not bad, but not a perfect circle. Okay, but if I hold it and I definitely press down too hard, it is really tricky to hold your pencil like this, especially an H pencil, and not put that much pressure on it. So if nothing else, coming back on the pencil to the very back or halfway, it's going to relieve the pressure that you're putting on it, just period. So, I mean, if you hold it like this, you're just instinctively going to be putting more pressure. Honestly, the most important thing is that you're not putting that pressure on an H pencil. So hold it however is the most comfortable for you, where you can relieve the pressure that you're putting on it the most. Because you just don't want those indentation lines, because it's frustrating if everything that you're drawing is being carved into the paper and you can't erase it. That is a recipe for frustration, right? That's how we end up ripping pages out of the sketchbook and starting over a million times, because we draw something that we can't get rid of. Someone's asking, how should we sharpen the graphite pencils? I'm going to talk about that in the next class when we start doing a little bit more shading. The next class is tonal shading with and without a ground. And I'm going to spend some time at the beginning of the class talking about alternative ways to sharpen your pencil other than the little handheld sharpeners. I'll just go ahead and tell you, if you have a X-Acto knife or a one-sided blade, that's like a box cutter, that's what we use instead of these. These are fine and they work most of the time, but you've probably noticed that they tend to break the pencil, sometimes break the graphite. So using a blade can really help you get a nice length to the graphite. So I'll do that at the beginning of the next class. It'll be optional. Okay, so but I'm going to hold my pencil at the back here and I'm going to try to draw a perfect circle. Okay, so it's hard to see. It didn't happen the first time, but I kept circling. I kept lightly circling. And even though you can't see all of my lines, somewhere in there is the perfect circle. And now all I have to do is erase everything that's not the perfect circle. And I've got my circle. And now I can either keep drawing with everything nice and light like this, or I can grab a B pencil, and once I've determined where I want my lines to be, I can solidify them with a darker pencil. And it's much easier to make a nice circle happen. So practice that. So it takes some getting used to, right? Just like I have to practice reaching my fingers on the guitar strings. All right, so once everybody has a circle, we're going to start practicing turning our shape into a form. So right now we've got a two-dimensional shape with our circle here, and we want to turn it into a sphere. Any questions about that? Like before we move on from just the holding the pencil differently? I know that's a whole new world for a lot of folks, but it's very helpful. I started teaching this lesson several years ago when I had a student in a watercolor class who kept having all these gorgeous watercolor paintings, but then you could still see the pencil lines that they were having a hard time erasing because they were pressing down so hard on their pencil. So I just started thinking about how I could help them practice. And now I teach that before I start any drawing or painting class. It doesn't matter how big your sphere is, you can, and yeah, look, I can't even erase that other circle there. Oh well. Okay, so we want to turn our two-dimensional circle into a sphere now. So this is where in the supply list I told, or it was optional to have a piece of fruit and some string. So if you've got a still life item, it really doesn't matter if it's a piece of fruit. Any still life item will be fine. We're going to start with the H pencils, or really any pencil you want for what we're doing next. Okay, so if you take your still life item and your string and you start to wrap it around your piece of fruit or your item, someone's asking, how do you use the pencil extender? So if you've sharpened your pencil to where it's really short, then it's nice to continue using it. So the pencil extenders are good for that. And yeah, you can still hold it at the end. I do it with paintbrushes or anything. It just takes some practice to get used to holding it towards the back. So even when I'm using a big paintbrush like this, I hold it towards the back. Sometimes I'll steady myself with put my pinky out. That helps, like steady your pinky on the paper if you're having a hard time holding it at an angle like that, and work your bicep muscle. All right, so we're looking at our three-dimensional form of our still life item, and we're looking at the contours of the form. So who knows what a contour is, or what is a contour line? Anybody want to tell me in the chat? What are contours or contour lines? A place that is darker. No. Yeah, okay, so it's, yes, it's the shape, and yes, it's the curves. So yeah, a lot of times people will say the outline of an object, but when we think outline, sometimes we think silhouette, just the outer lines. But I want you to think about all of the surfaces. So somebody said the surface of the object. Very good. So the shape or the curve or the elevational curve of the form. So all of the surfaces of the form. So the reason why I wanted you to get the string is because I don't want you to just look at one face of your object or one side of your object. I want you to start thinking in 3 dimensions whenever you're drawing a 3-dimensional form. So if I take that yarn or string and wrap it around my object, I see that it's curved, right? My apple is curved, but towards the end of the apple, I've got a different kind of a curve than I have in the middle, right? And on this end of the apple, I've got a different curve than I have here. So the curve starts to shift in elevation, right? And then if I look at the center of where the stem is happening, I've got this like wormhole of activity happening here, right? There's like a vortex at the top of the apple. And so I've got this vertical axis, almost like, well, yeah, I do. I've got longitude and latitude, right? So this would be our latitude curve. And then I've got the longitudinal curve of this side. So I've got the horizontal axis of the apple, and then I've got the vertical axis of the apple. And then there's depth because it's 3D, right? So just thinking about that, now when I go to draw that, I need to account for what's happening on all of the surfaces of that form. I'm just gonna grab some examples here. So if we were talking about a cylinder is curved, the horizontal side of the cylinder is curved like a sphere, right? But then the vertical of the cylinder is straight. And then depending on if I'm looking at the cylinder from the top or the bottom, that curve is going to either curve down or it's going to curve up. And then if I was looking at the cylinder straight on, where my eye line, the perspective of it is that my eye line is right in the middle, then I'm going to see the top of the cylinder curve up and the bottom of the cylinder curve down. So the vertical lines are straight, but the horizontal lines are curved. On a sphere, everything is curved. On the apple, we've still got a few moments where things may appear straight because the apple is not perfectly spherical, right? There's some parts of it that are flat. So when I'm thinking about a sphere, I want to make sure that all of my lines are curving. So sometimes it helps when we're sketching the contour lines of a sphere for practice to maybe think about like an olive and put a little circle at the top or a little oval shape at the top. And then make your lines curve from there, and try to think about a C curve, like the letter C, as we curve all the way around the sphere. Like here's a little sketch of a globe that I did recently. You can just see that my lines are curving on every surface of that sphere. So thinking about that little oval shape would be right here, and then everything is curved. And so that means not just on one axis, but on all of the axis of the sphere. So if I put another oval here on this side and start to do a C curve out of that, it might look kind of weird, but it's definitely going to be looking spherical. That's what we want. We want it to feel round and curved, right? So the more we curve our lines around it, the more it's going to appear three-dimensional. So where that can go wrong, and where I bet a few of you, so just any pencil. I'm using 4B just so my lines will be kind of dark and show up nicely so that you can see them. But what often happens when students are trying to create spheres is, so I tried to get you to do the C curve, but sometimes we get the curve on one side, but then it gets flat on the other side. So I like to say it's the difference between a C curve and a banana curve, because you know, a banana is kind of curved on one side, but then it can appear straight on one side of it. So if you start out with curved lines, but then they become straight at any point, then it's just confusing to the viewer if they're looking at a flat, you know, a drawing of a 2D shape or a 3D form. So you really have to make sure everything is curving. So if you think about that C curve, you're going to get more, you know, just keep practicing the C curve or the curve all the way around on the sphere that way. So any questions about sketching spheres before we start looking at the apple or the still life object that you guys have? Anybody want to show me their spheres so far? Are you having any issues with it that you want to talk about? Linda, thank you. Very nice. Oh yeah, Corey, I like that. That's looking spherical. All right. Thank you for sharing, guys. Oh, I'm seeing some really nice spheres. Yeah, let me go back to my drawing of the sphere again. So I kind of stopped there on that one, but yeah, just making sure that we're curving every line. And we'll talk more about adding shading and value in the next couple classes. In the next class, we'll talk about tonal shading. And so tonal shading is smooth, continuous shading. It's our basic shading technique. And so we'll talk about creating a sphere with tonal shading in the next class, and we'll work on a still life object again, both with and without a ground. And we'll talk about what a ground is in the next class. So we'll really dive deep into adding value and shading. But tonight I want to just focus on the contour lines and starting to draw three-dimensional forms. So because that can be very tricky when we're getting started for a lot of people to just even think in 3 dimensions when we're drawing flat objects. So anytime you're drawing, when you're creating any type of visual art, you're creating an optical illusion on the page, right? So we have to try to convince the viewer that they're looking at what you're intending for them to see, right? And if at any time we are shifting from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions, then it's going to make the viewer think that they're looking at a flat object. So that's just what I was illustrating with more of the banana curve on the sphere there, is that if our lines are getting kind of straight at any point, then it starts to look a little flat. It starts to feel more like maybe a grill, right? And not a basketball or a sphere or a beach ball. Looking at a beach ball can be really helpful because a beach ball has often it has a circle at the top, and then it has a vertical curve that happens. So you can really get a sense of that curve that's happening in one direction anyway, but the ones that we might struggle with are the ones that get it to feel rounded on a horizontal axis, but that's only horizontal because it's facing me that way. All right, so as I'm starting to draw my apple here, I'm going to start with an H pencil. Probably I go for the 3H. It's in the middle there. Oh, if I can follow, use the 2H because I'm not finding the 3H right away. Okay, so as I'm starting to sketch it, I'm holding my pencil towards the back, parallel to the paper, and I'm just finding my overall, my silhouetted shape of the apple. But then I want to start to sketch the contours. I'm going to go ahead and put my shadow that's falling across the table there as well, just to anchor it down. My apple's sort of leaning to one side, so I kind of got that little tilt or lean happening there. So what we're trying to do here before the end of the class is we're going to draw these, like this vortex still life item. We're going to map it out. We're going to get all of the contours on there. So whatever still life item you're using, we're going to map out what those elevational curves are doing on every surface of the item. So not just thinking about it in terms of a form with multiple sides, not just one side. So at the top, I've got that dip that's happening there and the stem that's coming out. So that's my basic start. And then the next thing that I want you to do before we start really getting the contours in here is just looking for any irregularities that are happening on your piece of fruit or your still life item. So if it's got a dent or a bruise or maybe a flat part of it, try to sketch in that irregular shape that's happening on those imperfections of it. And those are going to help anchor you down. They're going to give you some geographical landmarks so that you know where you are on your still life item. So I've got just some dents and bruises on my apple. I'm just looking for those. There's a little bit of a line, but notice how those are curving with the surface of the apple as well. So if you were maybe starting with a coffee mug as your still life object and you've got some writing on the coffee mug, if you've ever tried to sketch a coffee mug before that's got some writing on it, I've seen students do this where they get the curve of, you know, the value and the shading on the coffee mug, but then they start to put the text on and they put the text straight across on the mug. Well, the text is also curving on the surface of the mug too, right? So we need to make sure that the text is also following the contours and the elevational curve. So that's what I did there with that X on that. So the same thing with these irregularities that are happening. Yes, perspective. So, and we're going to dive really deep into perspective in several classes down the line here as well. We're going to focus on organic shapes at first, and then I'll talk a lot about linear perspective in like class 8 or 9, I believe. So, but for now, we're just sticking to organic forms where perspective is pretty straightforward and easy, although it does get complicated on organic forms, especially when we're talking about curving with the contours like this, with things like reflective light and these bruises and dents. So the bruises and dents that are showing up on my apple are also going to follow the curve of the apple, the surface of the apple. Okay, so once we've got those in there to anchor us, we're just going to start slowly sketching in these lines or these curves. So I'm going to start with my vertical lines, and it's helpful because I'm going to move my apple. It's going to shift the light a little bit, but the apple actually has these vertical lines that are curving that I can see to help guide me. Most pieces of fruit are going to have some texture or some lines on their surface that would help guide you in one direction or another on these contours. You might be tempted to go into autopilot here and just start sketching sort of like a beach ball, but really take the time to look at your piece of fruit and observe. A large part of art making is observation and just looking, learning to look. In my personal artwork, I draw and paint a lot of clouds, and I am constantly looking at clouds and just staring at them and studying them. So when I'm looking at a sunset, it's like research. So really look and observe what those vertical curves are doing. You know, there might be a bulge where it's sort of like right here, mine sort of bulges out, so it's not a perfect curve there. If you were doing a pumpkin, you would really see that there's different bulges and curves happening. And then the next vertical contour line would follow the same elevational curve around that bulge as the one next to it. So observation is always important. So yeah, it's going to take some practice if it's not working out for you so far. I see somebody said it's just turning out wonky. Just keep going. Sometimes we get to a point where things are not looking the way we want them to look, and that's when we want to give up and just stop. But if you just keep going, that's where the magic starts to happen, is through the practice, right? So maybe it's not looking right with the vertical curves, but once you start adding the horizontal curves, it starts to feel more three-dimensional for you. So I'm going to start with the inside here with my horizontal curves, and I start to really get that sense of depth that's happening at the top of my apple when I do that. So again, avoid the urge to go into autopilot here and really look, because all those irregularities, all those little imperfections or quote unquote imperfections in your piece of fruit are what's going to make it start to look like a piece of fruit. Like sometimes I'll do a sketch and it looks a little too something, looks a little too perfect. And if I put that, or it doesn't look like, you know, let's say a lemon, like that maybe didn't look like a lemon until I started putting the little imperfection shapes on there, and then it starts to resemble a lemon. So, and that goes for people or any subject matter, those things that make things unique or what make them look like what they are. All of our quote unquote imperfections on faces, when we get to portrait drawing down the line, we'll talk about that a lot, how things that make us unique are often the things that we try to edit out when we're drawing a person. But that's how you achieve likeness. So same thing with an apple. The more you look at your specific apple and what curves are happening there, the more it's going to start to look like an apple, period. while drawing contour, should we follow the basic shape of our subject? Yes and no, because you know the basic shape of the subject might end up being, like I said, a little too perfectly apple shaped, and your apple might be flat on one side. So try to look at specifically, try find those irregularities. Somebody, Monica said hers is looking like a pumpkin. Are my center vertical lines curved or straight? Mine were curving right here because there was a bit of a bulge, but then on the front, it was feeling kind of flat. So that's where, if I was really getting in here with some value, with some shading, I would try to push the light and dark to suggest that it was flat here and that it was curved here. And that would probably be through the light and dark. Well, obviously, yeah, with the value, because I would make it darker in the part where it's flat, and I would make it lighter in the part where it's bulging because the light's hitting it more directly there. And that will come up again a lot in a drapery drawing lesson that I've got planned coming up soon as well. All the different dips and curves that happen on drapery can be really helpful to what we're talking about now, to these elevational curves and contour lines. Okay, so once you get your contour lines mapped out on the form itself, turn your attention to the shadow that's falling across wherever you have your object sitting. So on the table or a book, or it's probably flat. So on the shadow, I'm gonna have some straight lines to imitate the flat surface of the table. And then I'm going to add just some cross-directional diagonal lines that are helpful to make that settle down. And just for a little preview on the tonal shading, if we wanted to start to add some value and shading here, we could switch to our heavier B pencils, like a 4B or a 6B. Or 5B, and still holding it parallel to the paper on its side. We're going to get the most out of it. And so tonal shading is just a smooth, continuous, blended value or shadow. Value means our light and dark. So on this shadow, I'm just going to keep things nice and flat and straight. Oh my goodness, hang on just one moment. I should have put my phone on do not disturb, folks. Is it going to come back on its own? It's getting a phone call. So I'm going to keep my tonal shading just following the curve of the contours. So we'll talk about this more next week in tonal shading with and without a ground. But just for now, just keep in mind that your tonal shading is following the contours of your form. So if you wanted to start to put some of the heavier shadows that you're seeing on your still life form, try to do that smooth tonal shading. So you can do like little tiny circles. Just keep it nice and continuous. So think about a tone in music as a continuous thing, right? Someone said it's orange. They don't really know how to shade orange. That stem. Yeah, and having the stem can sometimes be helpful. But with an orange, you've probably got a little seed at the top or some sort of thing happening like this at the end where it's spiraling out, where you're seeing the contours spiraling out from that. So next week we're going to talk going into more details, and talk about adding tonal shading. So we'll really break down the different H and B pencils to how we can achieve this value, this tonal value from dark to light. And we'll start with a sphere probably, and just get that curve to happen with this subtle shift from dark to light using all of the H and B pencils. So yeah, we'll be having a class every Wednesday, and then we've got some Sundays and Thursdays sprinkled in the near future as well. But if you tune in this time every Wednesday, I'll be here teaching a drawing class, and we'll be building our skills as we go. And starting out with graphite, moving into graphite and charcoal next month a little bit more, and covering a variety of skills and techniques. But for now, we're just sticking to the contours and just talking a little bit about adding some tonal shading. And yes, you can find me on Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram. I'll go ahead and write my Instagram handle here. I put it earlier in the chat. It's Adrienne Hodge Art. So please follow me on Instagram. I do a lot of work with calligraphy ink, so my work is very drawing based. Sometimes I like to be really pretentious when people ask me about my style and technique with, sometimes I call them drawings, even though they look like paintings. I'm using a lot of calligraphy inks. So yeah, you can find me on Instagram, or I've got a website. It's just Adrienne Hodge Art. About all the things. I'm pretty easy to find online. And any of the drawings that you guys make, I want to see them on your Instagram. So do the hashtag. Be easy for me to find you. Make it with Michael's. Or Michael's classes. Anybody want to share their contour line drawings so far? Let me see, Corey. Nice. I like that value you're starting to add to your shadow. Ooh, I'm seeing some really nice three-dimensional forms happening here, guys. Lovely. Thank you for sharing. Ooh, I like how Matthews is coming out of the background. It's like a floating vortex apple. Very nice. Just realized I covered up the hashtags there. We've got about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to just keep adding some tonal value to my apple here. And I'm following the curve. So as I'm following the vertical curve, I'm thinking about that C curve, right? So just making sure that there's a curve that's happening, following the curve of the lines that I just drew. So putting these lines on can be really helpful when you're drawing anything. I do this when I'm figure drawing. Sometimes I will add a curve like this to the torso or the neckline or the head, anything just to remind myself that the shading that I'm putting on there needs to follow that same curve, or that the curve is shifting. So, and then as I start to add the horizontal value here, I'm following that curve as well. And we'll talk about shading techniques in the class following next week. We're just, starting out, pacing ourselves here. So next week we'll talk about the tonal shading with and without a ground, since tonal is our standard. And then we'll talk about the alternative shading techniques, hatching, cross hatching, stippling, and scribbling. And so what I'm kind of doing here with the contour lines is I've created a bit of some cross hatching, but I'm just covering that up with tonal shading for now. But we'll get to all that down the line as well. Someone said the stem shadow seems to be going the opposite direction of the apple shadow. Okay, so yeah, when you've got multiple shadows happening, you just have to account for those in your sketch. So if you've got multiple light sources falling across your form, you might have one shadow, you might have 3 different shadows coming off of your apple or your stem. So you can just pick the most prominent one to focus on, or you can sketch all of them if you really want a challenge. And you know, when it comes to art making, I know I've talked a lot about some rules here as far as creating an optical illusion, but you know, if we have cameras, if we wanted a photorealistic or a perfect, you know, rendition of a still life form, we can take a picture of it, right? The beauty of making art is that we're putting our own style and our own spin to it. So don't beat yourself up if yours is not looking perfect, because that's really hard to achieve. And you know, if I can insert my opinion, kind of boring. I think adding your own flair and your own, you know, unique style to it, those imperfections make it look like an original work of art. So there's nothing wrong with, and we're all just, you know, starting from where we are. So build your skills from where you are, and note that everything that you do is part of the process, and it's another day of practice, and all of those hours that you put in practicing a skill, they add up. They don't just disappear unless you put them down for a while and don't come back to them. Also, before I leave you guys, I'll give you one of my favorite lines that I like to share with every class. On the first night of class, I always talk about this, and it's about just our inner critics and our self-dialogue and our interactions that we have with folks whenever we are creating art. So let's say after tonight you show someone your drawing and they start to say how great it is and how, you know, how impressed they are with your apple, and you immediately start to do that knee-jerk thing that a lot of us do when we get compliments on anything, and most of the time when we get compliments on our art, we start to self-deprecate, right, and say, oh no, it's terrible, it's bad, let me tell you all the things I hate about my apple drawing, right? So this is my line that I've come up with to help people accept compliments without being too conceited or seeming like, because that's the fear, right, is that if we just say thank you, that the person's going to be like, oh, I was just being nice, it really wasn't that nice of an apple drawing, right? Or they're going to know that, like, they're going to think that you think it's good, right? We can't have that. So we can't just say thank you, because that's really hard to do. Hopefully you can say thank you, but if you can't, this is my line for you. Thanks, I worked really hard on it. Right? Because then you're admitting that you did some hard work. You tried and you did some good work. So that's my line to you. When somebody says they like your artwork, instead of saying something negative about it, just say, thanks, I worked really hard on it. And yeah, thank you. I'm pretty proud of that line. That's going to be the title of my book maybe someday. Well, thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And yeah, I'll see you next week if you want to come back for the tonal drawing with and without a ground. And hope to see you again. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Pat. This was fun.